Hey everyone, Chad Frantzen, and I wanted to give you an introduction for today's program on the Kingdom Finance Show. And super excited today to have John Coleman, who's a new friend and a real thought leader in the movement for kingdom impact investing, kingdom or faith-driven investing movement. And he is the co-CEO and managing partner of Sovereign's Capital. He's also a real prolific writer and thought leader. So I wanted to bring him on the show, and I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation we had. It was very lighthearted. We covered a lot of different topics: kingdom business, investing, politics, and even some of the work he did in the presidential leadership program with several of the living presidents' libraries. I think you'll find that really fascinating. And at Wealth Builders Investments, we've actually had the unique opportunity to work with Sovereign's Capital and invest in some of their portfolios. And one of them being the Wonder Project, which is a new movie studio, recording studio, spearheaded by John Irwin, who's a real prolific Christian director, such movies as the Jesus Revolution, and also with contributions from Dallas Jenkins of The Chosen. So I thought, what better way than to share with our community, John Coleman, who's just a real inspiration to me in the work we're doing and running with some of these companies to make an impact for human flourishing. So enjoy today's episode of the Kingdom Finance Show, where I will interview John Coleman of Sovereign's Capital. Enjoy. Hi, everyone. Chad Frantzen. Welcome to the Kingdom Finance Show. I'm so glad you're here. On today's program, I have a new friend and someone I want you to meet, Mr. John Coleman with Sovereign's Capital. John, welcome to the Kingdom Finance Show.
Chad, it's a blast to be here. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Well, we were talking offline before we started recording, just kind of catching up on family and business, and we're recording this in the summer and just what we've been doing in the summer. But tell everyone just a little background on you and your wife and family. You guys live in Atlanta, Georgia, right?
Yep. Yeah,
So tell
we're in
us a little bit
Atlanta.
about yourself.
Married to Jackie, my beautiful wife of coming on 16 years this August. We had our big 15 last year, and we have 4 little kids who keep us constantly entertained between the ages of 3 and 11. I was telling Chad, we've had some work being done in our house, so that's left us scrambling all summer as we try and like stay with friends and get the kids out of the house where we can order food. But they're a blast. We have a few pets at home. We have a bearded dragon that my son owns named Bruce Willis, a little puppy named Max. And honestly, the only source of marital tension right now, Chad, is my wife is starting to mention potentially getting a second puppy. And I am not entirely sold on this proposition right now, but otherwise, great at home right now. Very blessed with the family that I've got. We live in Atlanta. I've been in the investment industry most of my life, most of my professional life, alongside a little bit of consulting. And we just really fortunate with how things are set up right now.
Yeah. So is she not asking for another bearded dragon?
The bearded dragon is the easiest pet. If your listeners take away nothing,
yeah, we have one too.
Them.
They're amazing.
You got one too?
Yeah, we have one.
They're awesome,
yeah.
Right? And like they don't bite; they just sit on your shoulder or whatever. My son, so he's my son's. He's the one pet that belongs to a specific kid, and my son will like put him on the bed with him while he's like reading or doing homework. He just chills out. Bearded dragon, very good pet for those listening.
Yeah, I recommend it. They're very low maintenance, much more than dogs or guinea pigs or things like that. But yeah, my son has the bearded dragon, and her name is Sushi. So
Sushi, there you go.
Yeah, so you get all kinds of creative names when you get reptiles as pets. So that's your that's your investing tip for the day. For your family is get a reptile because they're low maintenance and your kids will love them. So.
Very low maintenance. And I was worried we'd have to have like crickets around. I don't know what you feed yours, but Amazon has this like veggie pellet blend that our bearded dragon eats. And so that's not even a mess. It's very, very straightforward, Chad. So I would be so happy if we got a second bearded dragon. The second dog is a little more intimidating.
Oh yeah. You're going to have to take them on walks and all that. Oh. That's good. Well, John, I wanted you to come on the show because I was sharing with you offline, and just for our listeners, like one of the things we talk a lot about on the Kingdom Finance Show and at Wealth Builders is just finding people that have like-minded hearts, if you will, with just our purpose in life, walking out our Christian values. And whether you're a stay-at-home mom, you're a retiree, you're running a ministry, you're a pastor, you're a CEO of a large organization, I think it's there's this sound on the earth right now, John, which I'd love, just let's jump in on, of just there are people in the US and abroad who are really starting to recognize that their values, and we're talking about Christian values, right, as disciples of Jesus, like it matters in business, in what we do with our money, what we do politically, how we vote, etc. And I've been observing Sovereign's Capital, and John, you're the co-CEO and managing partner, I believe is your title with Sovereigns. But tell us just a little more what you've been seeing, just to kind of get started, and then I want to talk about your background. But this sound on the earth of people who are like, there's a different way to run companies and manage money that is takes into account the fear of God, if you will.
Yeah, totally, Chad. And I mean, you're building the same type of institution, and man, we're so impressed with what you're doing. I love the podcast and how you're talking about these topics publicly, and you've been such an innovator and leader in the space. So we're very grateful to be partnered with you. I'm very grateful to be here today. The history. So if I back all the way up, the framework with which we approach this is if you believe something, right? In this case, I'm a Christian faith with regards to sovereigns. There's no reason that stops wherever you are. That should be kind of an integrated part of who you are in every area of your life, right? Whether that be your giving or your investing or your spending or the way that you work, the way that you deal with friends and family. And yet in the modern world, I feel like we often kind of segment that, right? And certainly there are appropriate ways to do that. I used to work at a very mainstream firm, and my engagement with my colleagues there, I wasn't a preacher, right? It was there were boundaries that I should probably respect of others
Yeah.
in terms of the way that I speak to them or the way that I behave, but I should always be very authentic to who I am, right? And I should think through the context of my deeply held beliefs in the way that I work, in the way that I steward capital, in the way that I cultivate friendships, in the way that I treat others. Sovereign's Capital is an explicitly faith-driven investment firm that I joined about 3.5 years ago. I had previously worked at this big multinational asset manager in the mainstream world. And the idea there was, how can we help Christians activate their capital in a way, or anyone, we have LPs who are not Christians, in a way that's really concordant with Christian faith, that says, these are values that we believe in. These are values that we believe lead to human flourishing. And we want to steward our capital in a way that improves people's lives, that shows a love of God and a love of neighbor in everything that we do. And we think that's possible in the context of companies, in the context of real estate developments, in the context of all these other places in which we can invest capital. Ironically, that concept has been around forever, right? I mean, the Christian scriptures have things to say about that. Jewish scriptures do, Islamic scriptures do. I often remind people actually that the biggest faith-driven investing groups in the world today are Islamic. They're Sharia finance is what they refer to it as. And frankly, over the last 30 or 40 years, the mainstream world, through especially this context of ESG, has probably adopted the idea of living your values through your investments and encouraging companies to abide by your values in a much more aggressive way than the Christian church has, or than Christians have.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I find super interesting today is Christians have such a deeply held sense of values. We have hundreds or thousands of years of history where the scriptures have told us how to do that. John Wesley came up with the original negative screens 300 years ago. The Episcopal Church was the original activist investor in apartheid South Africa in the 1970s. And yet Christians have kind of fallen behind in the way that we think about this versus some of our mainstream peers. And so one of the missions I feel like I'm called to right now is, how do I help people understand that they can steward capital in a way aligned with their Christian faith and their values? And how do I help create the vehicles by which people can do that effectively, not trading off investment return with that mission, but actually helping to carry that mission into companies, into real estate, into all these other areas that we invest in?
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I love that I've heard you say it, and I've kind of I don't know where you got it from. It's a pretty simple saying, but I've adopted it, John, and I'm not giving you credit for it until today. But it's this. To summarize what you just said is, and I heard you say this when we were together. I can't remember when it was, but is that all investing is impact investing.
That's
And
right.
we could end the show here, but I want people to hear your story more. But like all investing is impact investing. So I
Yeah.
want you to elaborate on that. But even thinking about how we're both um, we're husbands and dads and business owners and leaders, and like even how we're investing in our children, like even how we're
Yeah.
investing with our neighbor, not just money, how we're investing in our teams that we're building. But I think to your point, and I want you to share on this, of like the more we can kind of catch that sound that everything you do is an act of worship. A.W. Tozer said that back in the 50s, like all of life is
Yep.
worship. And so like, well, all investing is an
Yep.
opportunity for impact, negative or positive, right? I mean,
That's right.
and it's up to us to recognize that. So tell us more what's been your experience of that.
Yeah, and that was, I kind of coined that phrase when we were. I got so tired of hearing people talk about impact investments, to be to be honest, because
It
it
got
was
too
like, hey,
cheap. Yeah.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
have like all these assets in this thing, and this impact investing thing is really cute. I'm gonna allocate, like 1% to kind of something I care about, and then 99% I'm gonna turn over to this blind stuff. And it was like, look, you may not be directing that 99% in a way that you think is having an impact, but it is having an impact, right? Like the financial sector is the most broad sector in the entire world. Your capital, our capital touches almost everything in the world. There are $130 trillion in managed assets in the world today. They funded the debt behind your local yogurt shop. They funded the company private equity funding for the plastic spoon that you're using in that yogurt shop. And they funded the purchase of the building that yogurt shop is located in. And by the way, down the street, Coca-Cola and UBS and all these other places are owned by large asset managers on behalf of individual clients. And so your capital is expressing values. The only question is whether you know what values it's expressing and whether you're consciously directing that. Um, the easiest example of this is, which is all too common today, so I'm not going to try and light these guys up. But I used to work at a big multinational asset manager. The big three asset managers in the world, State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock, the big three passive managers, are the largest shareholder comprehensively in almost 90% of the S&P 500, meaning that the S&P 500 companies, the largest companies in the United States, as their largest shareholder, have these three. Those three have dedicated teams on values investing for every single dollar that they put to work on your behalf. They have ESG teams that are directing those, and they're often behind encouraging companies to implement certain practices or to avoid other practices. And so every person who has the Qs in their portfolio or who has a BlackRock S&P 500 fund, surprise, you are a values-based investor. The question is whether you understand what values are being expressed, right? And so what we've said is all investors, how can you as an individual begin to take more ownership of the values that your capital is promoting and do so in a conscious way? And that doesn't mean everything has to be what people think of as a conventional impact investment, which was like microfinance lending or,
Right.
concessionary stuff. The idea is, how do you incorporate your values into the normal stuff that you're doing, whether that be your public equities portfolio, your private equity investing, your venture capital investing. And it doesn't mean you have to be an activist on every issue, far from it, but it does mean that you're conscious about the way that you're allocating that in a way that's deeply aligned with your principles, and at the very least isn't working against it. And the last thing I'll say, Chad, because I don't want to ramble too much, the simplest expression of this, it's a kind of quasi apocryphal story that I heard, but there was a nonprofit foundation in New York that served the healthcare community, and really was taking on things like lung cancer, for example, dominantly caused by tobacco use. And they did an analysis, and they were investing more every year in tobacco companies than they were giving away to the nonprofits fighting these particular types of disorders. And so, because they had not thought through, the way their investments were working, they realized that an entire part of their portfolio was explicitly working against the social outcomes they were trying to achieve. Tobacco is not everybody's thing. I smoke the occasional cigar. I'm not trying to say that particular thing, But it's like, man, why don't we try and think as consciously about
Yeah.
our investment portfolios as we do about our giving and spending?
No, you're right on. Well, and I think the enemy's plan is it's just divide everything between sacred and secular. You go do
Yep.
your 8 to 5 job, John, Chad, and you have your religion, whatever that is, on Sunday or Wednesday night, and you just keep everything separate. It's kind of like separation of church and state, right? It's like we're not going to talk about politics at church, right? I mean, we're just going to talk about the Bible. But we live in a fallen world, right? And Jesus calls us to pray on earth as it is in heaven, right? And so it means that there are broken things in the world that we can partner with God through the Holy Spirit to see change that's human flourishing, right? In business and in government, in education. I mean, look at our schools.
Totally.
Like there's a lot of things that are broken that need the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And what a time to be alive, really. I mean, you think about the opportunities we have and listeners have to be involved. Um, I want to ask you just personally, I've not heard you tell me this story, but I was doing a little research on you and I want to learn more about just I know for all of us, there's like oftentimes a God moment where you feel like God's highlighted your purpose or calling of like, I really need to go all in on this. And I know I want to hear a little more about you were in this presidential leadership scholar
Oh,
program
sure.
several years ago. I'd love to hear a little bit about that. Again, I don't want to make this a political conversation, but I'm fascinated by that. I do want to get your take on current events for sure. But I was reading like you wrote a paper or dissertation on from that on values investing, and I just would love to hear more of that experience and how that led you to where you are now at Sovereign's Capital.
Yeah, totally. So the Presidential Leadership Scholars is this really unique program that's run by a collaboration of four presidential libraries. So it's two Democrats, two Republicans. It's the George W. Bush Library and George W. Bush himself, the Clinton Library and Bill Clinton himself, the George H.W. Bush Library. And at that time, also George H.W. Bush was still living when I did. He's passed away, obviously. And so it's his library and foundation. And then the Lyndon Johnson Library and Foundation,
Okay.
three of which are located in
Yeah.
Texas, one of which is in Arkansas. And what they built is this 6 month program for around 60 scholars, where you
Okay.
come in and do effectively three things. One is you learn about presidential history, and I'll circle back to it, but it's the most amazing experience, actually. You kind of do these long weekends at each of the libraries. You have a kickoff, then you do each month, you do something else. So you do the four libraries, and then you have a graduation at one of the
Okay.
libraries. And for me, the presidential history was one of the most amazing parts because obviously Bill Clinton and George W. Bush are sponsoring the program. They get all these former cabinet officials from the administrations to come talk to you. You get these cool insider stories, and then the presidents, the living presidents, are incredibly generous with their time. I mean, I got to meet Barbara Bush and George H.W. Bush before they
Mm.
passed. George W. Bush came in and spent 3 or 4 hours with us and then did dinners with us a couple of times. Laura Bush sat in all day. I actually was at her table one day. She's just this most remarkable woman. If you ever want to be around someone you don't feel fit to be at a lunch table with, Laura Bush is much classier than
Wow.
I am. And I was aware of
Yeah.
that at every moment of that lunch. And then Bill Clinton, of course, true to reputation, came in and talked for a couple hours and then ended up closing the place down at like midnight with us because he just wanted to
Mm.
hang out longer. And so you get this cool insight into that. And then the other two thirds, there's kind of a third that's basically like leadership training. So
Mm.
how do we prepare you to go make an impact in the world? And then a third that's a special project. And so each person comes in with some project they want to have work on for the social good of some sort, whatever that is for you. And so
Sure.
mine was at that time, how do I do more of the work I'm doing in investing? I was working at this big multinational asset manager in what I thought of as impact investing at that time. How do I think about how we direct more capital in a way that's good for the world? Um, Little did I know, a couple of years later, I would discover Sovereign's Capital
Mm.
with the partners I work with now, and it would become my whole career, thinking about how to
Uh,
express values positively in the context of investing. But that was really the first time I started thinking about that consciously. And we did a few things at Invesco, but I ultimately think it also helped me formulate thoughts that became some of the work I would do at Sovereigns as well.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Yeah. I just, it's always funny how you have these divine moments where I'm in this presidential leadership program and you're studying, the libraries, all the libraries, and shout out to the George Bush Library in College Station, Texas,
Oh
home of the
yeah,
fighting Texas
great place.
Aggies, my alma mater. So I know Luke will love to hear that because I give him a hard time about Duke. So that's a great library. That's the only one I've been to of that. But it's fascinating to me that God used that to kind of get you where you are now, co-CEO of what I believe is one of the front leading investment managers, private public equities for faith driven, whatever we want to call it, but like purpose driven, faith driven investing. And so I appreciate you sharing that and just how that kind of culminated into where you are today.
Yeah, it
So
was awesome. And the experience is awesome. People should look it up if they're interested in doing it. It's not for everybody because it does have a little bit of the political tinge to it.
yeah,
But my favorite part was all the cool stories you get. I mean, you go to the
yeah.
Lyndon Johnson Ranch. President Johnson was kind of an interesting character in his own
Yeah.
right as a
Oh yeah.
Texan, you
Oh
probably
yeah.
know.
Oh yeah. I've heard the
And then,
stories. Yeah.
yeah, and apparently they're true. So,
Okay. Well, yeah.
no, it was a blast, though. I was really grateful to be a part of it.
So good. Well, I want to pivot back to some of the investing things. I want to talk a little bit about Wonder, something we've been able to
Yeah.
partner with you all on investing. But I would be remiss. I want to at least spend a couple minutes just giving your background with this presidential leadership program. I mean, what's your opinion on the times and seasons we're living in now with we're recording this in the summer of 2024. We've had an attempted assassination on a former president running for president, and we've just had a standing president say he's not going to run for reelection. I mean, this is uncharted historically. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know what to think, Chad. I mean, I feel like you got to give the date we're recording this because I feel like every 3 hours news
Oh,
breaks. It's
everything's going
like,
to change. So
oh my gosh. Yeah, it'll
yeah,
be totally
it's
different. We'll probably
July
have two.
July 23rd, 2024.
Yeah,
Because
by the
if
time
this
your
comes out in
listeners are
2 weeks,
getting
like
this, it might be two
yeah,
totally different presidential candidates. We have no idea.
it could.
I, look, I mean, right now, I mean, it genuinely is just one of the strangest moments, I think, in American political history. Obviously, you know, the last few years in particular, I think, have been a very odd political and economic moment. The COVID era, really the post-COVID era, I feel like the only analogy for the kind of combination of inflation, supply chain shocks, potential political dynamics that we've had in recent memory was like the late 70s, probably, when inflation was out of control. The government was finding ways to respond. They were too late in responding. The Fed seems to have navigated the outcome of this better than the Fed at that time did until you got Volcker in place. And in the political situation, I was talking to somebody about this today. The only analogy I can think of, at least in recent history, was the late 60s when going into the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, sadly, you had the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, who was the top candidate at that time. You had kind of a broken situation in terms of the Republican candidate and the path there. You had a contested convention at that time. You had riots, and a fraught political situation in general in the 60s. I'd say anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen over the next 4 months is the only thing you know about that person is they're fooling themselves. Like
Oh,
we just have no idea what's going to happen. And the fear that I have a little bit, I do have one fear. I have a couple. Well, I won't get into my political opinions. I'll offer a more neutral comment, which is I think we are seeing almost the culmination now of a multi-decade breakdown, at least in the function of our democratic institutions at the federal level and of civility. I had an advisor in graduate school who had worked for 4 U.S. presidents, and I asked him 4 or 5 years ago. I was like, "Look, is the dysfunction we're seeing in the federal government right now? Is this the worst in our lifetimes, or am I making that up? I mean, you witnessed it." And he said, "Look, I've been in politics since this." He first served in the Nixon administration, And he said, this is by far the worst I've seen it in the US
Mhm.
Congress. Like people not talking to each other, total dysfunction, inability to get things done. And I think over the last few years in particular, just the continued erosion of democratic norms, breakdown of institutions, the breakdown of trust in institutions amongst
Yeah.
people. And then, gosh, I mean, just to see an assassination attempt on live TV where we were
Live TV.
an
Yeah.
inch or two from witnessing the violent death of the leading candidate for president in America uh, on TV, should be a
Mhm.
wake up call to all of us, I think, just about the
Mhm.
tenor of our national politics at the moment and the role we all need to take, I think, in trying to fix it, right? Because this is the greatest I think America's the greatest country in history. And as an
Mhm.
American, I feel such an obligation to perpetuate that, to give that to my kids. And probably more than at any point in my life, I kind of feel that's at risk right now.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree with you. And I think it's, you know, the loss of civil political discourse, right? Where you can, one person could be uh, liberal, one could be conservative, but at the end of the day, they could go out and have dinner and have a drink or, go out to a movie. But it's like now it's just, it's so divisive. Like you can't even have a conversation with a family member about it. It's like
Totally.
you're not going to talk about the debate if you know. And so I think to tie this into investing, it's like watching that what happened with Trump and the assassination attempt. Um, I'm just constantly reminder the media's role in how my personal opinion, and you're free to share yours, right? I really view like that Satan has got the media so in his hand where it just creates all this anger and division, and it's almost like a screw tape letters, kind of a thing where it's just like, oh my goodness, what misinformation, lack of trust, all those things. And so I'm glad, even though some of the work you all do at Sovereigns and some of the work we do at Wealth Builders Investments, that when it comes to my portfolio, am I going to have Comcast, who owns MSNBC, in my portfolio? Am I going to have New York Times? Am I going to have Google? Am I going to have Time Warner, who owns CNN? Those are valid questions, I think, for a kingdom-minded Christian. Um, whether you're investing for your business or your church or just personally for your retirement, like, I mean, I really think that's a key reason of why to say, hey, maybe we should look at what our 401k or our kids college account has in it, because that doesn't help what media is doing. And I think it's both sides. I mean, I have my thoughts on some of the key companies driving it that I've mentioned, but um, that's really sad to see in this day and age.
Well, I'll tell you a quick anecdote before we move to the next topic. Actually, in PLS, we were speaking to someone from the H.W. Bush administration. So, for your listeners who are too young to remember, maybe the H.W. Bush administration was kind of 88 to 92. And this was really echoed by some Clinton administration officials. They said one of the biggest changes in American politics that they personally witnessed was the advent of 24/7 cable news. And they said two things changed actually from a presidential point of view. One is that with 24/7 news, you were never off duty. You had to become very guarded. The news stations began chasing what's that new piece of information that's going to fill the 9 o'clock hour, the 10 o'clock hour, the 11 o'clock hour, the midnight hour. And it just became this perpetual noise machine where they were constantly seeking new content that would attract viewers. And then the second was, as a result of that, they began to drop some of the traditional journalistic standards. And they said the first time they noticed this was it used to be you had to have two confirmed sources to report on a fact as a journalist. It's kind of the rule of thumb. They noticed right when 24/7 news came out, it became one confirmed source. And then over the next few years, it became no confirmed sources, more stuff on background. And so what we're seeing now is decades of the erosion of, and now especially with social media,
Oh
and
yeah,
just it's not just
it's every
24/7,
every
it's
minute.
second by second. And
Yeah.
it's created the spin machine, the noise machine, perception management. And frankly, I don't like to use the term disinformation because I think that's been abused, but every media, no one knows who to trust anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
few people seem trustworthy, seem like they're going to give you accurate information. And I think that has actually been corrosive to our culture and to American
Yeah.
politics.
You're absolutely right. Well, we'll pivot because we could stay on that. I want to quote you. John's a very accomplished writer, and we won't have time to cover all this. But you were featured on, I think it was Fox News recently, with the 43 things I've learned in honor of your 43rd birthday, right?
That's right.
So check that out. Go Google that if you want to. John Coleman, 43 things I've learned. But this reminds me of number 28 on your list, which is the news is basically bad for you. And I love this. Let me just read it. It says, modern news is designed to provoke and create cycles of urgency, partisanship, division, and fear. Turn off TV news, watch a documentary, read a biography. You won't miss much, and you'll reclaim your sanity. I love that.
I've just alienated all our members of the media. I did not mean to trash everybody. There's some good
Well,
people
that's
out there.
publicly out
I
there.
think,
So, I mean,
look, I think it's true, man. I get wrapped up in the news, if I'm totally honest, and I'll
the
be on
same.
Twitter too
Yeah.
much or whatever. And I found one of the best things I'll say is I've gotten more and more worried about our current political situation. One of the best things for me has been reading histories, reading biographies.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Cool.
started kind of reading biographies of the American founding, of presidents, more recent presidents, even ancient biographies. Like I did a couple of great biographies of Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, Alexander the Great. And what it did for me was it like took me out of this 24/7 noise machine and kind of put things in perspective and has helped me lift up that perspective. And,
Uh-huh.
that doesn't mean that what we're experiencing now isn't actually urgent. I mean, look, presidents resigning, assassination attempts, those are big deals. Those will end up in
Significant.
history books.
Yes.
Those will end up in history books. But it helps you to at least start to parse what are the things that are important and will end up in history books, and what are those things
Mhm.
that will pass away. And
Yeah.
man, I do feel like at least balancing that with this news consumption. Man, if you just watch TV news 24/7, you'll go nuts. I don't see how people do it. It's
But
like
yeah, you'll go
grab a
crazy.
book that's 100 years old and read
Yeah,
that.
get in the
And you give
Bible.
yourself
Go read
perspective.
an
Or read the
epistle or a
Bible. Yeah,
psalm or something.
that's
Yeah.
right.
I mean, do something. Yeah. No, I mean, my wife will catch me watching that stuff late at night. She'd be like, "What are you doing? Turn that off." Like, and like, you're right. Well, I'm like, well, I'm getting ready for my podcast, right? I need some information for my next
You
thing I'm
got to
going to
do it. It's part of
do.
the job. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm doing my due diligence here. So, but I mean, you're right. And I think I want to segue and talk about wonder here as we wrap up, but just it reminds me that, you know, we are citizens of the kingdom, right? And so we're not citizens of this world. We are sojourners. And so, we in the United States, I believe it's still the greatest country in the world. We talk a lot about sheep nations and goat nations, and everyone will be held accountable before the judgment seat of Christ. And yet, we are of the kingdom, and we live in a democracy, a republic. We hope, but at times it feels like an oligarchy, or it feels like all these other things, socialism. But I'm just reminded, like, coming back to the center here of, like, we're kingdom minded people. That's what we're called to do, is carry out the Great Commission, right? And so tell me a little more about one of the ways you and I got connected was through a kingdom investment, through the Wonder Project, which some of our listeners are familiar with. And this is an exciting one, something fun to talk about, what's going on in media and entertainment, and maybe share a little bit about that, and what's going on with the Wonder Project.
Yeah, totally. This is one, Chad, it was fun to hang out with you, and we can tell some stories about that. The the Wonder Project is something I feel just so fortunate to be involved in. I was actually with members of the team just last week with one of the productions that they're doing, and effectively, it's a new faith and values oriented movie studio that's been created. Couple of great creators. So John Irwin is involved, who did Jesus Revolution, who did I Can Only Imagine, really his brainchild to put this together. but he also has partners in Dallas Jenkins, who's playing a critical role, Jeremy Latcham, who's come on board, who originally helped produce the Iron Man movies, for example, some of the great Marvel works, just an extraordinary guy. John Gunn, who's been a long-term writing partner and director with John Irwin, lots of Johns floating around the project.
Yeah.
And then also just some extraordinary business executives, including Kelly Merriman, who's a former Netflix executive, who's now the CEO of the project. And the idea is, in this day and age, we need a movie studio that's dedicated to creating content that's redemptive, to help promote things worth believing in, right? That's really conducive of human flourishing, and that you can feel comfortable sitting down and watching with your family, right?
Yeah.
You and I know, I mean, so much of Hollywood used to be oriented to that. I mean, you think back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you had Ben-Hur, you had the Ten Commandments. My favorite movie, It's a Wonderful Life, which is just this beautiful film with religious themes
Classic.
throughout it, but it's so natural, right? It's not just for Christians, it's for everybody. And it's such a redemptive story. And I think our perception right now is that there are fewer and fewer studios working at a Hollywood level of quality. So at the level of quality you'd expect from Top Gun Maverick or from a Game of Thrones, or whatever show you want to pick out, but with those redemptive values that you can watch cross-generationally with your kids. And yet there's such a desire for that. We got involved because we started to see this market opportunity um, peeking through. You know, the prestige TV era and movie era over the last 20 years has seen more and more kind of darker stories, stuff that, I watch some of this stuff, right? So it's not like I'm standing in judgment, but it's become very dark. A lot of it has become themes that are difficult to watch with your kids, or you wouldn't want your kids to embrace,
Yeah.
right? Focus on darker subject matter. And we seem to have lost the appeal to this broad group of people in America and globally who have personal faith, Christian faith, Jewish faith, who have family values, who hold on to more traditional values, who want to see those values reflected in film, in television series, in unscripted works. And the evidence for that was just the explosion of The Chosen, which is now, one of the most watched television series in history. A Sound of Freedom that just blew up at the box office last year with really redemptive themes, trying to, take kids out of human trafficking, for example. John's movie, Jesus Revolution, which a major Hollywood studio released a movie titled Jesus Revolution, and
Yeah.
it broke even on the Tuesday after it was released and doubled its projected box
Mhm.
office take, and went top 5 on Netflix when it began to stream. So we knew there was an appetite, but no one was really forming the capital around that. And so John and Kelly came to Sovereigns last May or so, and they asked us, would we be interested in partnering with them in this Series A round to try and help create this vision that they had. So we took that on. We were able to work with you, Chad, through that on
Yeah.
behalf of other investors,
Yeah.
and now it's coming to fruition. We closed the Series A round last December. We ended up being the beneficiaries. As this came together, the fundraise, as these big projects I just mentioned took shape, a lot of the streaming platforms started to take notice and realize that they were missing the boat. We ended up being very fortunate to partner on content with Amazon, who's made a significant investment. And now, with that partnership with Amazon and with the capital that you and others were able to put into the company, we're into our first production. So one that's been announced
Amazing.
is a TV series called House of David. It will be the story of the biblical David, done with a big budget, kind of a mainstream streaming type budget. And it's going to tell this story of a young shepherd boy who was picked out from nowhere, who had this dedicated faith and went on to be one of the most famous leaders of a nation in the history of the world. The shepherd boy who came from nothing and went to be a person that everybody of every faith in the entire world knows now. I mean, everybody knows the story of David and Goliath,
Yeah.
and it's this amazing story. And we're like, how has nobody ever told this story in film before? It's one of the most famous in the world. And so what we're going to try and do is tell that in a way that combines almost like the best of The Chosen with the Lord of the Rings, or something more action oriented. And I just think it's that type of content where you think, gosh, there are so many stories worth telling that have never been told. And we think that can hopefully be a great thing for the investors in the franchise. but it can also help shape culture in a positive way.
Yeah.
And the test of that is, it can be something I can sit down with my 11-year-old son, and both of us are going to love it. We're going to be able to have meaningful conversations around it. And there are just so few things that we can do that with now.
That's incredible. I love that. The Chosen meets Lord of the Rings. I mean, it's just, I mean, and you and I think met in person at the event maybe a year ago in Dallas, and we did a visit to the Chosen set and got to meet John Irwin and Dallas Jenkins and others. And but I mean, what a very tangible way. If you want to put texture on one of your investments, I mean, obviously you want to be diversified, but this is very substantive, where you can be like, yeah, this is media and entertainment that's creating content that you look at how many streaming programs people are on and how many people watch TV and they're on their phones, but how do we take that back and at least have a sliver of the pie that's redemptive, as you said, that aids in human flourishing and tells the story, right? Like tells the story of King Jesus and how people can come, to saving faith in Jesus. So I'm super excited. I want to thank you for allowing us to be a part of that. Our clients are tickled pink, as they would say in Texas, to be a part of that. I want to tell you one quick story before we wrap up. We were on the Chosen set, and just an amazing tour, right? That Chosen set outside of Dallas. We were doing the fundraising for this Wonder Project, and so much to see if you've never seen it before, right? If it's your first time. And they would take us through all these huge buildings, and they were a pretty big group, I thought, and they're doing such a good job of explaining it. And we get to this one warehouse that it's like the set where they keep all the sets, and they have all the pots and the sofas and all the different things that you see in a scene. And I remember, and people kind of wander off, because there's just so much to look at. Like, oh, this is the water jug they use, or these are whatever accessories. And I don't know if you remember this, but because you were at the front leading it, and I was at the back, and somehow I ended up in this warehouse, and it was your wife and your son, your oldest son, I believe, who was with you, and and I'm over here in the back looking at all the swords. Okay, so they have all these Roman swords and all the stuff that they're using, and of course they're yelling up front, "Hey, come on, we're gonna leave!" And your wife and son and we're kind of back there, and I'm picking. I just went ahead and picked up one of the swords. I'm like, "Come on, you're a guy." I was like, so I pick up this sword and I'm looking at it, and your son is standing off in the distance, and your wife's trying to get him. Come on, we got to go. And then I just look at him and I'm like, "Come here, buddy. Come and grab it." And so he walks up and he grabs that
That's
sword,
awesome.
and he's like, "Oh man." And I took a picture for him, but he was just like he was on the moon,
Oh yeah.
like a 10-year-old boy at that age, like picking up one of those big swords. And I thought I mean, such a cool representation of like inviting people into the story of God, how great he is. And so anyway, I was thinking about that this morning before we came on, and I'm like, I don't know if I ever told him about that. And
See, if
so
I
we
were a
didn't get in
better
trouble.
dad, I'd have been the one helping him hold a sword, Chad. You really accounted for my failures there, like
No,
helping the guy out.
I was just helping because your wife and I were like, well, we don't want to get in trouble. And I'm like, I think it's fine, we're not gonna like chop anything down. So, but he needs to hold the sword, he needs to get a picture with it. So so
That's
funny.
awesome.
But
Yeah, I will say, man, wandering those sets, and The Chosen is such an extraordinary, extraordinary thing. Like these people are good at this. These historical details, until you've been on a movie or TV set, you have no idea.
right.
They spend so much time getting the details right. Like we were just touring one the other day, and they could talk us through the history of why, the paintings or the windows were shaped that way, what type of
Mhm.
garments they were using, the research that had gone into it, where they had sourced the materials, like, the drawings that they had based it on, that they had recovered from wherever. And if you ever want to get a sense for just the type of excellence that's required to create something really magical where you can lose
Yeah.
yourself in it, like The Chosen, I think, get on a movie set, because there is not a single thing on that set that someone hasn't thought deeply about. And it's just mind blowing to me, the technical excellence that goes into that. So I bet those swords, there was some sword guy or
Yeah.
gal that they had
Oh
gotten to
yeah.
like research the heck out of Roman swords, and they've got the
Yeah.
models for it, and they, built a machine to construct them. It's extraordinary, the detail that goes into it.
Man, it's so good. Well, I've really enjoyed having you on, John. I want to mention one thing to listeners, and then I'll let you kind of close with any kind of final words of encouragement for people in this day and age as wanting to be kingdom-minded business owners, investors, entrepreneurs. I want to let all the listeners know if you're liking what you're hearing, John and I talk about faith-driven investing, purpose-aligned investing that aligns with biblical principles. I want you to connect with us at Wealth Builders Investments. I know I will get the question, as I did when I interviewed your colleague Matt Monson of Sovereigns Capital, of, well, how do we get connected with Sovereigns and what they're doing? Well, we actually invest in some of the work Sovereigns is doing. And so if this really kind of ignites your heart of like, man, I really want to make sure I'm doing this, reach out to our team at Wealth Builders Investments. And I'm excited to say we're really honored to partner with Sovereigns as one of the couple of the strategies we're implementing at Wealth Builders. Best way to connect is go online, wealthbuilders.net/invest. You can connect with us there. We have a free download, and just drop us a line there if you want to learn more about the work Sovereign's doing and how we are using them at Wealth Builders Investments. So, with that, John, I'd love any closing thoughts from you, just for people who are like, I'm really hungry to step into being a kingdom-minded professional, wherever they are in the world, and wherever God has them at age and stage. But what would be your advice, just from your years of wisdom and walking with God?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing, just to double down on something you said, when people talk to us about how to get in the game on investing, look, money is complicated, investments are complicated. Our point of view is that individuals and institutions are both better partnered with advisors who can help them. And so the first way to get in the game is to find an advisor who shares your values, who's willing to work with you, who will tailor it for you, who's sensible. And I think Wealth Builders is that, Chad is that. And finding the right advisor is your gateway effectively to really being able to, I think, live into values investing, because trying
Yeah.
to do it on your own is quite difficult, right? If you don't live in this each and every day, evaluating the investments, making the right decisions, knowing what's out there is quite hard. I have a financial advisor, even though I work in the industry. And so, my big encouragement is like, be thoughtful about that choice, find someone who shares your values, and they're the ones who can help be your river guide effectively through this space.
Mhm.
And then the second encouragement I'd give is what we started with, which is, look, if you're a person of faith, you obviously believe in the historical truth of your Christian faith. You also believe deeply that Christian faith has something meaningful and unique to say about human flourishing, that our Christian faith tells us what can make our lives better. And that in a world where we're seeing record levels of mental illness, of unhappiness, of social isolation, of just this lack of purpose, that our faith really gives us a solution to that, or to most of that, and that if we leaned into that, we can actually help people. We can help ourselves, but we can help those around us.
Mhm.
And so my encouragement to you is, don't check your faith at the door. You need to obviously be thoughtful about the way in which you do that. And nobody wants to make people feel outcast or excluded or anything of that nature. But really lean into trying to love your neighbor in every day, your work, through your
Yeah.
investments, through your social interactions, and have confidence that your faith gives you the key to helping people unlock greater joy in their lives.
Mm.
And if you can do that, I think you can start to live into your faith more fully.
That's well said. Yeah, I mean, it's an invitation, right? Like we get to do this. We get to live in this day and age, and always looking for how can we share our faith, just in how we go about our business, how we handle adversity, how we handle team members, how we handle our neighbors, and I mean, it's very practical at the end of the day, right? I mean, to your point of just it's making those daily decisions. Well, this has been good, John. Thank you so much. I would love to do another one sometime. Thank you for being on the show today, John Coleman with Sovereigns Capital, and just a fellow kingdom leader that I look up to, and hope to spend some time with you again in the future. And be sure to ask your son about the sword at the
I
Chosen set
will.
and see what he remembers about that. I know there's a picture because I know I took it of him and your wife. So thanks for what you're doing at Sovereigns and with the Wonder Project. I'm so excited about what John Irwin and his team are doing there, and House of David. That's going to be exciting. So we'll be praying for more opportunities to make an impact for purpose. And thank you for being here today, John.
Awesome, Chad. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining me today on the Kingdom Finance Show. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps to get the word out. For more resources on becoming a Kingdom investor and to connect with us directly, visit our website at wealthbuilders.net. That's wealthbuilders.net. We'll see you next time on the Kingdom Finance Show. The content provided is for educational purposes only. We encourage you to seek personalized investment advice from your financial professional. For all tax and legal advice, please consult your CPA or attorney. Investment advisory services are offered through Authentic Counsel, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cabin Securities, a registered broker-dealer. The content of this podcast does not constitute an offer of securities. Offerings can only be made through an offering memorandum, and you should carefully examine risk factors and other information contained in the memorandum.